I have been honest with myself and with others, that I have been faithful to my friends and fair to my opponents. I have not sought this enormous responsibility, but I will not shirk it. I found on my desk, where the buck stops, the urgent problem of how to bind up the nation's wounds, and I intend to do that. My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over. We have a lot of work to do. Let's get on with it.
Gerald R. Ford, America's 38th president, served from 1974 until 1977. He was the first vice president to be appointed to the office after his predecessor resigned, and the only vice president to become president after the president resigned, making him the only American who was both a vice president and president without ever being elected to either office. Hi, I'm Trevor Holloway at the Gerald Ford Museum in Grand Rapids, Michigan. America's 38th president was actually born Leslie Lynch King Jr. on July 14, 1913 in Omaha, Nebraska. His mother, Dorothy Gardner King, and father, Leslie Lynch King, divorced shortly after their son was born. The future president's mother then moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where she married Gerald R. Ford, the owner of a small paint company. Ford adopted his new wife's son and officially gave him his name, Gerald Ford. Before long, they simply called him Jerry. Jerry Ford grew up with three younger half-brothers, James, Richard, and Thomas. All four boys were expected to abide by their mother's three rules: work hard, tell the truth, and always come to dinner on time. He studied hard and received good grades in school, and was voted the most popular high school senior in Grand Rapids. As a teenager, Jerry earned money by waiting on tables and washing dishes at a restaurant. In 1931, he entered the University of Michigan, where he also earned good grades, and played on the school's undefeated football teams of 1932 and 1933. In 1934, his teammates named him their most valuable player. When he graduated in 1935, the Detroit Lions and Green Bay Packers both offered him a contract to play professional football. Instead, the future president decided to become a lawyer. He entered Yale Law School, and in 1941 earned his degree in the top third of his class. He then returned home to Grand Rapids, where he opened a law office. On October 15th, 1948, he married Elizabeth Bloomer, a fashion coordinator for a Grand Rapids department store who everyone called Betty. The Fords would have 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter.
1949 to 1973, Congressman Gerald R. Ford, Republican from the 5th District of Michigan, was one of the most respected voices on Capitol Hill.
It was as a lawyer in Grand Rapids that Gerald Ford first became interested in Republican Party politics. In 1948, he challenged Congressman Bartell J. Youngman in the Republican primary election, and won. That fall, he faced a Democratic opponent for Michigan's 5th Congressional District, Fred Barr, and won that election. The voters of Michigan re-elected Ford to his seat in Congress 12 straight times after that, where he served for over 24 years. In Congress, he was known as a moderate Republican and an expert on military affairs. He generally supported Democratic President Lyndon Johnson's military strategy in the Vietnam War, but opposed many of Johnson's social programs, arguing that they were either too costly or unnecessary. In 1965, he was chosen House Minority Leader. But it would be after Richard M. Nixon was elected president in 1968 that Gerald R. Ford would be propelled into two of the highest offices in the land, without ever being elected to either one.
Congressman Ford was asked to join the Warren Commission.
It began in 1973, when federal investigators uncovered evidence that President Nixon's vice president, Spiro T. Agnew, had accepted bribes while in office. Agnew resigned as vice president on October 10, 1973, and because of the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, President Nixon nominated Gerald Ford to become his new vice president.
He is a man who has served for 25 years in the House of Representatives with great distinction. Congressman Gerald Ford of Michigan.
They like
It is for the members of this committee to determine to the best of their abilities whether a nominee for the second highest office in the land possesses the qualifications requisite for that office. We have a responsibility of examining...
But I believe and I hope that I have been honest with myself and with others, that I have been faithful to my friends and fair to my opponents, and that I have tried my very best to make this great government work for the good of all Americans.
Both houses of Congress approved the nomination overwhelmingly, and on December 6th, Ford was sworn in as America's 40th vice president, the first appointed vice president in the nation's history. But he would only be vice president for about 8 months.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
During this time, Congress had been investigating President Nixon, who they believed broke the law when he hid evidence about a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate building in Washington.
Was involved in Watergate wrongdoing.
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency, and if not removed, the president himself would be killed by it.
President Nixon stunned the country today by admitting he held back evidence.
He acknowledges that what the transcripts say is, as Mr. Nixon puts it, at variance with what he told the American people on other occasions.
Rumors of President Nixon's imminent resignation swept Washington and the world today.
President Nixon reportedly will announce his resignation tonight.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
When it was proven that the president had abused his powers, Richard Nixon resigned on the morning of August 9th, 1974. After he waved the nation goodbye in the doorway of Marine One, in the White House East Room, the nation's 40th vice president became its 38th president.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability,
And will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over. I have not campaigned either for the presidency or the vice presidency. I have not subscribed to any partisan platform. I am indebted to no man and only to one woman, my dear wife. I have not sought this enormous responsibility, but I will not shirk it. Unlike my last two predecessors, I did not enter this office facing the terrible decisions of a foreign war. But like President Truman and President Lincoln before him, I found on my desk, where the buck stops, the urgent problem of how to bind up the nation's wounds. And I intend to do that. My fellow Americans, we have a lot of work to do. My former colleagues You and I have a lot of work to do. Let's get on with it.
When he took office, Gerald Ford kept all of Nixon's cabinet officers and nominated Nelson A. Rockefeller, the former governor of New York, as his vice president. Soaring inflation and the public's loss of confidence in government challenged the Ford administration. Sharp rises in prices also threatened a severe business slump. Abroad, fighting on the Mediterranean island of Cyprus was developing into a major crisis. On top of that, relations between the new president and the Democratic-controlled Congress became strained when Ford vetoed over 50 bills, saying he believed they would have increased the inflation rate. His popularity dropped even more on September 8, 1974, when he pardoned President Nixon for all federal crimes his predecessor might have committed while he was chief executive.
I do believe that I, not as president, but as a humble servant of God, will receive justice without mercy if I fail to show mercy.
To fight what he called the nation's public enemy number one, Ford quickly established the Council on Wage and Price Stability to stop soaring inflation. He then introduced legislation to create public service jobs and another law to lower federal income taxes. By early in 1975, inflation slowed and the economy began to recover. In foreign affairs, Ford relied heavily on his Secretary of State, Henry A. Kissinger, who had been Nixon's chief advisor. Together, they helped Egypt and Israel settle a territorial dispute and worked to continue Nixon's program to improve U.S. relations with China and the Soviet Union. Life in the Ford White House was relaxed and informal, and the whole family impressed visitors with their personal warmth and friendly hospitality. Mrs. Ford underwent cancer surgery about a month after her husband became president and became a noted advocate of health issues and women's rights. While in office, President Ford survived 2 assassination attempts. The first occurred on September 5, 1975, in Sacramento, California, when a follower of a convicted murderer named Charles Manson tried to shoot at the president. Then, on September 22nd, a woman protesting government policies shot at Ford in San Francisco, but missed. Both women were sentenced to life imprisonment. In the summer of 1976, Ford asked voters to elect him to the job of Commander-in-Chief.
Mr. Chairman, delegates and alternates to this Republican convention, I am honored by your nomination and I accept it.
At the Republican National Convention in Kansas City, he chose Senator Robert J. Dole of Kansas to replace Nelson Rockefeller as his vice president.
We will wage a winning campaign in every region of this country, from the snowy banks of Minnesota to the sandy plains of Georgia.
The Democrats nominated former Governor Jimmy Carter of Georgia and Senator Walter F. Mondale of Minnesota as their candidates.
I'm ready, I'm eager to go before the American people and debate the real issues face to face with Jimmy Carter.
But it was not to be.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
That I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute.
the office.
I want to thank my predecessor for all he has done to heal our land.
Carter defeated Ford by over 1.5 million votes in 1976, gaining 297 electoral votes compared to Ford's 240.
My fellow Americans, I once asked you for your prayers, and now I give you mine. May God guide this wonderful country, its people, and those they have chosen to lead them, so that we, in all who come after us may be the humble servants of thy peace. Amen. Good night. God bless you.
After less than one full term in office, President Gerald Ford left the White House. He retired to a private life, spending time in the Colorado mountains and California desert. In 1979, he published his autobiography, A Time to Heal. 2 years later, he presided over the opening of the Gerald R. Ford Library in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the Gerald R. Ford Museum in Grand Rapids. In 1982, Mrs. Ford helped found the Betty Ford Center in Rancho Mirage, California, a hospital for the treatment of alcoholism and drug abuse.
I hope that all of you will reject those on both extremes who mistake the honest clash of ideas for a holy war. I thank you from the very bottom of my heart. Thank you very, very much.
America's 38th president was a popular and gifted athlete who gave up a potentially lucrative sports career to study the law. His calm, friendly manner and unquestioned honesty was warmly received after the scandals of the Nixon administration. He should go down in history as a chief executive who restored dignity to the presidency and helped heal the wounds of Watergate.